Welcome to the Two Man Advantage podcast. I'm your host, Aaron DiCarlo. Along with me is co-host Kevin McShann. Kevin, how are you doing today, sir?
How are you, buddy?
Oh, not too bad. We're here. We're going to talk a little bit about some Major League Baseball because we're getting near the point of the All-Star break, and those Tigers are two games above 500. So hopefully that they can, hopefully that they can finally start to turn it around. Heading into the All-Star break and after. But the one player who has a tremendous season so far, we got to be talking about the impact of D Martinez, Kevin.
Well, certainly without D Martinez, I mean, this team would probably be further down the standings than they are. I mean, he's having an all-star season, his first all-star selection. He's pacing the team with 24 home runs, and with Cabrera out, his importance takes on a larger role because he is now, along with Victor Martinez, the power source in this lineup.
Absolutely. You said that he's leading the team with 24 home runs, and he's batting .291 and has 58 RBIs so far this season. And you got to talk about the power of his bat in that middle of that lineup, especially with Miguel Cabrera out. They are relying heavily now on this second-year player to continue to improve.
Isn't it funny that somebody else's trash is somebody else's trash? He was dead and buried in Houston.
That's right.
He's been the savior of the Tigers. I mean,
so far, yes.
They're only 2.5 games out of the wild card. It doesn't appear as if they're going to catch Kansas City anytime soon. Although Alex Gordon's injury may play into that. I mean, they're 7 games out with half the season to go, and if they can tread water while Cabrera is out, it'll be most important for not only D Martinez, but players like Nick Castellanos, Jonas Cespedes, and Alex Avila to start hitting with more consistency.
Exactly. You said it like that right there. They have to be consistent, and they have to be consistent on the pitching aspect of the game. Their starting pitching, which for years have always been the strength of the Tigers when it comes to winning games. Yes, of course, we're going back to when they had Max Scherzer, Doug Fister, and all these great pitchers. But
Rick
Porcello. Well, he had up and down years, but we talk about these. You still have a very deadly lineup of arms starting games. You have David Price, Justin Verlander, Anibal Sanchez is finally starting to come into his own, but it's you're not looking at the JV hasn't been JV this year.
That's an understatement.
You know, and then you're giving all these guys who are just called up to the majors like Buck Farmer, you know, a chance to improve, and Kyle Ryan, who has been a gas can. You know, he had his moments, but you know when they're giving up leads, you know, especially that game in Milwaukee. I'm sorry, not Milwaukee, in Seattle. A couple days ago. That was. When did Seattle become like the home run hitter's ballpark?
That's a pitcher's ballpark, and
didn't look like it.
No, it didn't look like it when they played the Tigers. But you're right, the middle game of that series they should have won. I mean, they had first and second, nobody out in the 11th and didn't score, and they still took 2 out of 3. But when you're this far back in the division and have the 4th highest payroll in baseball, you should be better than 2 games above 500.
Exactly. I think that's what they need to do. They need to get back to the way things used to be, like in the beginning of the seasons when they're really hot. They start off like a house on fire, but now like they win 2, they win 3, then they drop 2. They win 2, they win 3, they drop 2. It's consistent, but not in the good way. They need to string together, 5, 6, 7 wins in a row.
Nice, wouldn't it?
It would be nice, But like, bring us to another question: is if they continue to improve and win games and catch up ground to the Kansas City Royals, does that make them buyers or sellers come trade deadline day?
Well, I think this series against Minnesota will determine that for them. I think they have been so inconsistent, as we've been talking about. If you look at the track record of Dave Dombrowski, he's always been a buyer. But you have to look at the assets the Tigers currently have. I mean, David Price is a free agent. Jonas Cespedes is a free agent. Alex Avila is a free agent. And there are some qualities that other teams around the league would be interested in as they head down the stretch. Now, the question for the Tigers is, do they legitimately think they can make the playoffs? And if they're still believing that they can, they should be buyers. But if you look big picture wise, I do think they have to weigh the benefits of selling. What about you?
Like I said, if they're in close, let's say if they're in second behind the Royals and they're back a couple games, like 2 or 3 games at the most, I see them being buyers. And it's Dave Dombrowski. He always likes to make a splash on trade deadline day. Last year was David Price when they were in the hunt with Kansas City to win that division. Tigers got the best of them. They went out and they gave up Austin Jackson, Drew Smiley, and they got it David Price, which is a great move. But will that happen again this year? Depends on how well they do and if there is a market. I know that there is a market for, let's say if you want to increase that bullpen or get another bat in the lineup. You have those chips. You have Avila that you can play. You have David Price you can throw out there. You have Cespedes who, you have cards that can be played, but it all depends on where in the position do they stand and if it's going to be worth the gamble if they give away these players.
Well, I mean, you have to look also at the viability of re-signing these players once their contract's up. I mean, David Price, I personally don't think he's coming back.
No.
So why do you still have him as an asset? See, the Tigers are in a difficult position because they've got an owner who's 85 and probably on his last leg. He's won everywhere else he's been with the Red Wings, and he's rebuilt the Tigers, but he has the elusive championship with the Tigers, which he hasn't maintained. But he also has to judge the fact of winning now versus building for the future. I mean, Mike Ilitch has always been someone who wants to spend, but there is a certain point where you have to look at where the Tigers are, as you said, at the end of this series against Minnesota. I mean, they've owned the Twins this year, so if they're going to make a move, I do think this series against the Twins is vitally important. And I do have to say this in just closing the segment. Verlander is not pitching worth what his contract says. I just had to get that out there.
You just have to vent a little bit that Verlander is not being the Verlander that it says on his contract.
Well, I mean, if you pay a pitcher $200 million, I want more than 5 innings out of him. But that's the end of my mini rant. That's okay.
All right, okay. Well, I'll give you a number one for that rant. And speaking of number one, I'm looking up. It's the index finger, and obviously we all have an index finger.
We do,
except for one player. Actually, a couple players.
Couple of
players in the NFL. The index finger is pretty important. You hold the mic and you can wave it in the air, and you can throw a football. But for Jason Pierre-Paul of the New York Giants, that might be a little bit difficult because he was in a accident involving fireworks, and he had his right index finger amputated,
and he's got a broken thumb.
Well, the thumb will heal. Your right index finger will not come back.
No.
So maybe we'll see him on the sidelines somewhere giving out high fours this year.
I see what you did there.
You see that? You see what I did there?
We'll talk about that when we come back.
All right, we'll talk about that right when we come back. And also for your latest news, anything about the two-man advantage, go to our Facebook page, www.twomanadvantagepodcast.com. And when we come back, we're going to be talking some NFL and some index finger missing segment. Stand by. Welcome back to the Two Man Advantage podcast. I'm your host, Darren DeCarlo, along with Kevin McShann, and we're talking some NFL football. And Kevin, training camps are in the middle, or in the middle. Hold on a second there, Kevin.
Sorry.
All right, there we go. Now the people can hear you.
Yeah, training camp's about 2 weeks away, and the New York Giants will have to make alternate plans because one of their best defensive players will not be there because of a dumb fireworks accident on the 4th of July. But
Exactly. If you're not aware, Jason Pierre-Paul, one of the premier defensive players in the NFL, injured himself and had his right finger amputated. So he's gonna be missing a crucial part of his hand.
well,
But like if you are the Giants, and you spend so much money on this guy, gave him this monster contract with millions and millions of dollars, don't you put in a clause that says do not touch or anything that could blow up or cause your fingers to be amputated? But it's something that they tell children not to play with fireworks because they're dangerous. Shouldn't they be telling professional athletes the same thing?
well, listen, athletes are allowed to have a personal life, but when you're in the middle of a contract negotiation and a player and his team are trying to negotiate a contract that will pay him between $55 and $60 million, wouldn't it behoove them not to listen? I'm all for patriotism, and I think it's great that he wants to celebrate the 4th of July. But if he knows that he's on a contract and he hasn't signed his $15 million a year tender to play for the year, and he already had the $60 million a year contract revoked, wouldn't it be smart of him to hire someone that actually knows what they're doing?
Hire a professional? Yes.
Instead of having fireworks explode in
your hand.
I mean, that just boggles the mind to me. But
I know it sounds crazy to us, but maybe it was different. Maybe because we're not there and we don't know the whole story. But from what I hear, it just sounds like a bad idea. Don't put anything, that will boom in your hand.
He wasn't the only player. A quarterback from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, C.J. Wilson, also had a similar accident on the 4th of July. I mean, you only have a certain number of years to play professional sports.
Right.
After that, you can do whatever you want, right?
You can blow up your whole arm if you want.
You can do whatever you want, but while you have the optimum potential to make money,
right.
And listen, I'm not saying to put them in a cage, but I'm also saying to use common sense with these things because it's just. And you look at what Royal McIlroy did. He was playing soccer and he blew out his ankle, I believe it is. And
he's going to miss the British Open.
He won't play in the British Open. So I'm not saying treat these athletes like China dolls, but there comes a certain point when you have to use some level of common sense, don't you think?
Exactly. And like you said, if he was a quarterback or a wide receiver, this would be a big thing. This would be this would be a bigger thing than it was. But since he's on the defensive end of the football, do you think it's not as big as an issue, or if he was actually physically catching the ball or throwing the ball?
Well, no, I think no matter what position you play, it takes on more of an importance if it was a quarterback. But he is essentially one of the quarterbacks of their defense. He is what the Giants are hoping to be an impact player on the defense. And if you are the Giants, and reportedly they sent their trainers and representatives down there, and they weren't even allowed to see him in the hospital. And he technically isn't property of anyone because he hasn't signed a contract.
Right.
But if you are going to ask somebody to pay you $55 to $60 million, wouldn't it behoove you to see, to talk to your employers, to tell them how stupid you are? But that's my own. That's my 2 cents on the issue. I mean, it's just stupid to play with fireworks and have it explode in your hand. That's okay. If I talk about this anymore, my blood pressure is going to go up, but that's okay.
Kevin's getting angry. But let's switch gears a little bit to the NBA and this whole thing about DeAndre Jordan agreeing to terms that he's going to join the Dallas Mavericks. A couple days later, I think just up to recently last night, he was surrounded by all his Clippers teammates to trying to get to him to change his mind and stay in LA with the Clippers. And apparently it worked. He's going to be staying in LA, and so if you're Mark Cuban, you have to be pissed off with that. It's like, I don't understand. Why don't they have free agent signs the day that free agency opens like they do in the NHL?
Well,
this whole thing, like, oh, okay, Kevin, I'll give you, a $20 million contract for 3 years, but you can't sign it until next week.
The NBA moratorium on contracts makes no sense.
Yeah.
I mean, if the NBA would allow people to negotiate contracts and then sign them, they wouldn't have this problem. But in the case of DeAndre Jordan, listen, he's not an $80 million a year player.
No.
He's just not a $20 million a year player. I mean, he's a good defensive player, but he has no offensive skill set.
Well, he can dunk the ball. That's what he's known for.
Well, that's...
You throw it up and he can dunk it.
That's the limitations of his offensive game. But if you're going to pay somebody $20 million a year, you want them to do more than dunk. And listen, what happened with the Clippers should have never happened. I mean, if he was that indecisive, I don't want him on Dallas' team anyway. If I was Mark Cuban and I'm paying somebody a total of $80 million to be the lockdown defender on my team, I want him to make a decisive decision. I understand that the moratorium is in place, but listen, DeAndre Jordan should be with Dallas right now. And when you look at what Dallas did, they allowed Tyson Chandler to walk because they thought that they had something in place with DeAndre Jordan. So my feeling on this is DeAndre Jordan needs to grow up a little bit because he wanted to leave the Clippers because he wasn't getting the ball enough on offense, and there was a reason for that. Listen, DeAndre Jordan back with the Clippers. If that's what he wants to do, people are allowed to change their mind. I'm just annoyed because of the way the system works in the NBA.
Exactly. And also it shows that the NBA that they don't develop players. They don't develop these young guys that get drafted so high. They sit on their bench for 2 and 3 years, and when they finally get a chance, they just bring in some other guy who has, he's kind of a big name, but that's the whole point. That you win with players, and then you develop them, and then you make them better than they are. That's the whole point of the NBA. You see all these players, and so so you don't have to keep on paying all this money for someone that's not really worth it. Like DeAndre Jordan, I'm sorry, I think he's a great player. He's an athletic player. He can't defend. He can occasionally shot block, and he has no post game. And so you think that's worth $20 million a season?
No, and he actually got a raise from he'll be making $88 million over 4 with the Clippers. So that's what, $22 million a year for somebody that can't score. Listen, DeAndre Jordan's a good defensive player. He's not worth the money he'll get. He wasn't worth the money he was going to get paid in Dallas, and he's certainly not worth close to $90 million what he'll get with the Clippers. But the Clippers got them. They have no money to do anything else now because they were going to have to trade some players just to get under the luxury tax. But listen, DeAndre Jordan, he wasn't going to win anything in Dallas. Anyway, he's not going to win much in L.A. because that team is getting older. But listen, if I was Mark Cuban, I'd be pissed because you thought what happened was the Clippers tried to get a meeting with him without the agent. His agent is best friends with Mark Cuban, so he wasn't answering his phone, and he was doing the meeting with the Clippers in secret. And listen, if you want to change your mind, that's fine, but be a man and step up to the plate and call the Mavericks before you make the decision, instead of hiding behind your old team and decommitting from the commitment you've already made.
Absolutely. Speaking of, let's stay on the topic here of NBA free agency. How good are the San Antonio Spurs now? Are they obviously the clear-cut winners to win the title next year?
Well, you don't win a title in June and July, but well, you do, but you don't. You don't
make it official until
in free agency. But listen, the Spurs had a great free agency period. I mean, David West left $12 million on the table from the Indiana Pacers to take the veteran minimum to play for the Spurs. And they got LaMarcus Aldridge, who can potentially replace Tim Duncan when he's done. So in my opinion, the Spurs won the free agency period. We'll see if they'll win during the season as well, which they typically do. And I think the Spurs are one of the best run organizations in all of sports.
Absolutely, because they're a dynasty from start to finish. It starts at the top with Greg Popovich and Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili and that centerpiece and Tim Duncan, which you said, now that they have Aldridge, I think that's like the passing of the torch from Duncan's team to Aldridge to have Aldridge be the leader of this team once they ride off into the sunset, hopefully with another NBA championship.
The only thing you need to know about the Spurs is they've had one first round or one top pick since 1997. They've got 5 championships, and the one pick in the top of the draft was Tim Duncan in 1997. The Spurs have found a formula to win, and they keep following it.
Stick to it, absolutely. So from NBA, let's switch over to the NHL, because NHL, Canada Day, NBA free agency, and then NHL free agency. And there was big news from the Toronto side of the place, and that's Phil Kessel is no longer a Toronto Maple Leaf.
No.
Hurrah!
6 years of wasted life.
6 years of wasted life, according to Steve Dangle, whose video is immensely entertaining when he talks about that. No, you can't blame him. I feel the same way. That 6 years, you hear about Kessel, he's this, he's that, he's a goal scorer, and then he just gets up and leaves. You trade him for some good young prospects, but pretty much nothing. You let him walk away. The
full rebuild is now began.
It has beginning. This was the big, building block that you needed to get rid of.
Yeah.
So obviously with
Dion Phaneuf is next.
Well, we'll see about that. It's either Dion Phaneuf or Tyler Bozak or Joffrey Lupul. One of those three are not going to be here come October. But I think it's amazing to see how quick they act, and obviously how scary is Pittsburgh going to be with Crosby, Malkin, and now Kessel.
They're going to score, that's for sure.
They have the power to score, so I look for Pittsburgh to be a dominating force next year and maybe give the Hawks a little run for their money when it comes to the Stanley Cup.
A little competition never hurt anybody, that's for sure.
Well, that's the whole point of the NHL.
Or any sport, for that matter.
Sport. Anyways, I want to get your thoughts on Michigan switching from Adidas to Nike. Do you think this is a good idea for them to go back to the old Nike where it used to be?
It's all about money. That's my thought on Michigan. It's all about money and making as much as possible. And with Harbaugh now in the fold, they'll be making a lot of it.
Very good. Well, Kevin, I think we pretty much covered everything that we want to cover. Anything that you missed that we need to hit on?
No, I would just encourage everybody to check out tourme.com, us on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, and thanks for listening, everybody.
We'll see you next week.